I was 9 years old the year I discovered the thrill of smuggling Oreos. It wasn't just about eating them, it was about the heist. The kitchen at night was my Vegas casino, my small hands trembling as I twisted the plastic packaging as quietly as possible, praying the crinkle wouldn't echo through the house like an alarm. My pillow, which was meant for innocent dreams of cartoons and superheroes, had turned into a vault of cookies. At 9, I believed I was untouchable. After all, my older brother was the family troublemaker. He once glued his fingers together just to see if they would become stronger. Compared to him, I was the golden child. Polite, obedient, except for my not-so-secret addiction to sugar. My mom didn't mind snacks in moderation, but I was a creature of extremes. Moderation? I didn't know her. Every night after brushing my teeth with the fake diligence of a child who thinks toothpaste cancels out dessert, I'd creep back into the kitchen. My heart pounded like I was in a spy movie. Mission, double stuff, was my life's work. Each Oreo I slipped under my shirt was one more victory against the tyrannical rules of bedtime. For weeks I thought I was brilliant. My pillow grew lumpier by the night, but I shrugged it off. Maybe it's just fluff shifting, I told myself. What I didn't realize was that cookies leave crumbs, and crumbs attract suspicion. By the time my mom discovered the stash, my bed looked like a raccoon had been nesting in it. That evening, the confrontation arrived like a storm. She stood at the doorway, holding up my pillow with one hand, her face somewhere between exhaustion and disbelief. Oreo crumbs rained down onto the carpet. "Care to explain this?" she asked. I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. My mind went blank. It wasn't that I didn't have excuses. I had dozens. Aliens, my brother, a mysterious raccoon burglar. But something in her expression told me she had run out of patience. I swallowed hard. I got hungry? Her eyes narrowed. "At midnight? Under your pillow?" I tried a smile, the kind I thought might melt her anger. It didn't. She set the pillow down and crossed her arms. "That's it," she declared. "You're grounded from everything." The word everything hung in the air like thunder. I blinked. Everything? Yes. No TV. No games. No snacks. No fun. You're even grounded from breathing. And there it was. The sentence that would shape my 9-year-old brain forever. Now, here's the thing. Adults say things they don't mean. They use words like weapons. Exaggerations meant to sting. But when you're 9, words are laws. Words are carved in stone. When she said I was grounded from breathing, I didn't hear sarcasm. I heard a rule. A deadly serious rule. For a moment, I stood frozen, trying to comprehend the logistics. Breathing was, well, required. I'd never been grounded from something that kept me alive before. No one had prepared me for this. Teachers taught us about multiplication tables and the water cycle, but no one covered what to do when your mom bans respiration. So I asked, with the trembling innocence only a child could manage, "How long can I not breathe for?" She didn't even blink, until I say so. And that was that. Something inside me clicked into place. My mission had changed. No longer was I the snack goblin, ruler of midnight Oreos. I was now the exiled breather, condemned to survive without air until pardon. That night, as she tucked me into bed, I lay there wide-eyed, every inhale feeling like a crime. I practiced holding my breath, convinced that maybe, just maybe, if I mastered it, I could obey her decree. The world felt dangerous. My lungs, traitors. I had entered a new era of obedience, one where survival itself was negotiable. Of course, my brother noticed first. He always did. The next morning, as we shuffled into the living room, He saw me tiptoe past Mom, cheeks puffed out, body tense, holding in my breath like a deep-sea diver. "What are you doing?" he whispered. "Grounded," I hissed between gasps. "No breathing." He blinked. Then a slow grin spread across his face. "So you're training to be a ninja?" I considered this. A ninja. That sounded cooler than being punished. Maybe this was my cover story. "Yeah," I said, nodding solemnly. "Training." He laughed so hard he nearly fell off the couch. "You're gonna pass out, dummy." But I didn't care. Mom had given an order, and in my world, orders were absolute, even if they made no sense. By noon, I had perfected a rhythm. Breathe when she wasn't looking, hold when she was near. It was exhausting, like living in stealth mode. My chest burned, my face flushed purple, but the fear of extra grounding was stronger than oxygen itself. I thought I was doing well, brave even. But by late afternoon, I was crouched behind the couch, clutching a cushion, wheezing like a dying accordion. That's when Mom noticed. "What on earth are you doing back there?" she asked, peering over the couch. I froze. This was it. The interrogation. I coughed. "I'm not breathing, because you said so." For a moment, there was silence, pure, heavy silence. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she'd forgotten how words worked. 10 seconds passed, then 20. Then, suddenly, she broke. Her laughter filled the room like a thunderclap, loud and unstoppable. She laughed until tears rolled down her cheeks, until she had to lean on the wall for support. My brother joined in, howling like a hyena, pointing at me like I was the star of the best comedy show on earth. I stood there, confused, humiliated, gasping for air I wasn't sure I was allowed to take. Finally, Mom wiped her eyes and, still giggling, said, "You're grounded, again, because you've suffered." I didn't know what that meant, but I accepted it. At 9 years old, you don't question the logic of parents. You just obey, even if it kills you. And that was the night I learned 2 important lessons. Words matter, and I am very obedient when snacks are involved. If you've ever tried to stop breathing while living in a family home, you'll know it's not a sustainable plan. But 9-year-old me, I was convinced I had discovered a system. It started that morning. Breakfast was cereal, the soggy kind my mom insisted was healthier than anything fun. My brother crunched loudly beside me, milk dripping down his chin, while I sat stiff as a board, cheeks puffed, holding my breath every time Mom walked into the kitchen. I'd inhale just before she appeared, then freeze, body tense, like a soldier waiting for inspection. If she lingered too long, I'd exhale silently through my nose and hope she didn't notice. The moment she left, I'd gasp like a fish flopping on a dock. My brother noticed quickly. He always noticed. "What are you doing?" he asked, spoon midair. I gave him a look that screamed, "Do not expose me." "Training," I whispered. He squinted. "Training for what? To die?" "Ninja training," I said. Louder now, because that sounded heroic. He nearly spat cereal across the table. "You? A ninja? The only thing you sneak is cookies." I wanted to argue, but I was too busy clutching my chest, lungs burning. By the time Mom sat down with her coffee, I was practically vibrating. "Eat your cereal," she said. I nodded, eyes watering. She had no idea her child was mid-stealth mission, suffering in silence for the crime of Oreos. The stealth strategy only grew more ridiculous as the day went on. Walking past her in the hallway, breath held. Brushing my teeth while she checked in, breath held. Sitting in the living room while she folded laundry, breath held. By noon, I was dizzy. My brother started timing me with his watch, cheering like a coach. "Go, go, go! You're almost at 30 seconds. I didn't realize then that my brother wasn't helping me. He was using me for entertainment. To him, I was a circus act, a free sideshow. To me, I was living proof of my loyalty to the law of mom. But the stealth mission had flaws. Big ones. First, I underestimated how often a child interacts with a parent. There was no escaping her. She was everywhere. In the kitchen, in the hallway, in the laundry room. Each time she appeared, it felt like the boss battle of a video game. My lungs were the health bar, ticking down with each second. Second, I hadn't considered witnesses. My brother, of course, was delighted. But neighbors, friends, the mailman, anyone who happened to catch me crouching behind furniture, face red, chest heaving, probably thought I was part of some bizarre endurance cult. Third, I was bad at it, really bad. By mid-afternoon, I'd attempted to sneak across the living room, holding my breath, only to trip over the dog. The crash brought Mom running. "What was that?" she demanded, arms full of laundry. I froze, gasping quietly, trying to stay obedient. My brother piped up from the couch, grinning like the traitor he was. "He's not breathing, Mom. He's practicing." Her eyes narrowed. "Practicing what?" I panicked. "Ninja training!" I blurted, then clapped a hand over my mouth as though I'd revealed state secrets. Mom raised an eyebrow but said nothing. She simply shook her head and walked away, muttering something about strange children. I thought I'd survived. Little did I know, my stealth mission was about to collapse. That evening, I made the fatal mistake of hiding behind the couch. I'd been doing it all day, ducking into corners, crouching in shadows, timing my inhales so carefully that I thought I had mastered the art of invisibility. But invisibility is hard when you're 9, purple-faced, and gasping like an asthmatic accordion. She caught me crouched there, knees pulled up, lips blue, eyes wide with determination. "What on earth are you doing?" she asked. And that was the moment, the collapse of the mission. My lungs gave up, and I gasped so loudly it sounded like I'd been underwater for hours. "I'm wheeze, not wheeze, breathing, because you said so." The silence that followed could have swallowed the room whole. Her face shifted through confusion, disbelief, then something else I'd never seen before, realization. "You thought I meant that literally?" she said slowly. I nodded, ashamed but proud at the same time. After all, I'd followed orders. Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. And finally, she laughed. Not just a chuckle, not just a giggle. Full, uncontrollable laughter that shook her shoulders and brought tears to her eyes. My brother rolled off the couch, clutching his stomach, howling. "I told you he was training to be a ninja." I stood there, chest heaving, cheeks burning, unsure if I was the joke or the hero. Maybe both. Looking back now, as an adult, I can see the comedy of it. But at 9, it was deadly serious. I wasn't just holding my breath, I was proving my loyalty, my obedience, my desire to follow the rules, no matter how strange. Kids live in absolutes. Adults throw words like confetti, casual exaggerations, empty threats. But to a child, every syllable is law. If Mom says, "Don't breathe," then you don't breathe, even if it hurts, even if it makes no sense. That day was the first time I realized how dangerous words could be, how heavy they were in the ears of a child. It wouldn't be the last lesson. By the time the couch incident happened, I was a mess. My stealth mission had turned into something closer to torture. My lungs were staging protests, my brain was dizzy, and my brother was treating me like the family clown. To him, this was the best entertainment since Saturday morning cartoons. To me, it was survival. The scene replayed itself in my head for hours, crouched behind the couch, gasping like a stranded fish, while my mom's laughter filled the living room. I should have felt relieved. After all, she was laughing, not angry. But at 9 years old, laughter didn't always mean safety. Sometimes laughter was a prelude to punishment. I knew my mom. I knew that if she thought I was mocking her, she could double down on grounding. My logic was simple. If she caught me breathing when I wasn't supposed to, she might add more days to my sentence. My imagination ran wild. Maybe she'd ground me from blinking next, or from drinking water. I pictured myself shriveled like a raisin, explaining to my teacher that hydration had been outlawed in my home. So I stuck to the plan. Even after the laughter, even after the couch scene, I tried to obey. Later that evening, my brother cornered me in the hallway. He had that mischievous grin, the one that always meant trouble. "You know," he whispered, "if you really want to be a ninja, you have to practice in the yard, at night." I narrowed my eyes. Outside? Yeah, that's where the real training happens. Hiding in shadows, moving without sound. It sounded believable. After all, I'd seen enough cartoons to know ninjas operated at night. I didn't realize my brother was simply trying to get me outside so he could watch me stumble around in the dark like an idiot. But at 9, I trusted him. So that night, long after Mom thought I was asleep, I crept into the backyard. The air was cold, the grass wet with dew. I crouched low, holding my breath, trying to melt into the shadows. My brother sat on the porch, stifling laughter. "Good, good. Now, roll across the yard." I did it. I rolled, dizzy, breathless, damp from the grass, convinced I was mastering an ancient art. And then the porch light flicked on. What in the world is going on out here? Mom's voice cut through the night like a siren. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, eyes blazing. I froze mid-roll, my lungs screaming, my brother choking on laughter. He wheezed, "We're training him to be a ninja." "A ninja?" she repeated. "Yes," I gasped, unable to hold it any longer. "Because you said no breathing." There it was, the confession. The truth spilled out into the night air. For a moment, Mom just stood there. The porch light buzzed, moths circling it like tiny satellites. My brother held his stomach, shaking with silent laughter. I knelt in the wet grass, trembling, waiting for judgment. Then, slowly, her expression changed. Confusion softened into realization. Realization bloomed into disbelief, and disbelief once again cracked wide open into laughter. It wasn't just a laugh this time, it was a full-body experience. She doubled over, clutching her knees, tears running down her face. The kind of laughter that makes you weak, that leaves you gasping for air. She tried, then broke off into another fit. You thought I meant literally." I nodded, cheeks burning. Her laughter echoed across the yard, joining the crickets and the rustle of trees. My brother was on the ground now, pounding the grass with his fist, wheezing. And me? I stood there, soaked and humiliated, but also strangely proud, because in my mind I had proven something. I had taken her words seriously. I had followed orders. I had suffered for it. When she finally calmed down, wiping tears from her eyes, she walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Sweetheart," she said, still chuckling, "you don't have to stop breathing when I say things like that. It was an expression." "An expression?" I repeated, unfamiliar with the concept. "Yes, I didn't mean it literally." I blinked. This was a revelation. Expressions? Exaggerations? Adults could just say things they didn't mean? The rules weren't laws? It shook my 9-year-old worldview to its core. But before I could ask more, she leaned down, smiling. "Still, you're grounded again. Because frankly, you've suffered enough." It didn't make sense. How could someone be grounded for suffering? But that was my mom. Half comedian, half judge, always unpredictable. Years later, we still talk about that night. She calls it one of her worst parenting moments. I call it my first lesson in the slippery nature of language. Because kids don't hear sarcasm. They don't recognize hyperbole. They hear law. And when your mom tells you you're grounded from breathing, sometimes you roll across the lawn at midnight, pretending to be a ninja, lungs on fire, believing you are obeying. The night of the ninja training became a family story almost instantly. The very next morning, my brother wasted no time spreading the tale. By the time I stumbled into the kitchen, hair sticking up like a haystack, he was already halfway through reenacting my purple-faced stealth mission for our dad. And then he rolled across the yard like this. My brother flopped onto the floor, clutching his chest in mock agony. Because Mom said no breathing. Dad nearly choked on his coffee. Mom, still red-eyed from laughing the night before, shot me a sympathetic look, but not before she snorted into her mug. I wanted to crawl under the table and disappear. At 9 years old, there was no humiliation quite like being laughed at by your entire family. But humiliation is funny, at least funny to everyone else. For the rest of breakfast, I was the ninja breather. At first, I hated it. Every time my brother whispered, "Don't breathe, ninja," in my ear, my cheeks burned. But as the days passed, something strange happened. The story stuck. It became lighter, less shameful, almost funny, even to me, because underneath the embarrassment, I realized something important. My mom hadn't been cruel. She hadn't meant to punish me with something impossible. She just said the wrong words at the wrong time, tired and exasperated. And instead of resenting her, I'd chosen to obey, because that's who I was. Obedient, literal, desperate to please. And when she laughed, not in mockery, but in disbelief, I realized she wasn't laughing at me. She was laughing at the absurdity of it all, at her own mistake, at the way children's minds work like straight lines while adults zigzag. In that moment, the distance between us shrank. She wasn't just my mother, the enforcer of rules. She was human, fallible, capable of saying ridiculous things without thinking. It was one of the first times I saw her as more than an authority figure. She was a person, tired, flawed, loving, and funny all at once. Of course, none of this stopped her from officially grounding me again. "You've suffered," she'd said, laughter still bubbling. "Therefore, you're grounded." I didn't understand the logic, but somehow it felt right. It was her way of closing the circle, acknowledging my ridiculous obedience while still reinforcing that sneaking Oreos wasn't allowed. Punishment mixed with affection. Correction mixed with comedy. It was parenting, her style. As weeks turned into months, the grounded from breathing story became a running joke. My brother brought it up at every opportunity. When I forgot to take out the trash. Careful, or Mom will ban oxygen again. When I fell silent during dinner. Uh-oh, is he holding his breath right now? When friends came over. Wanna hear the time my brother almost turned into a grape? I groaned every time, but secretly, I noticed something. The story united us. It was one of those tales that every family has. The ones that resurface at birthdays, holidays, awkward silences. The embarrassing, hilarious, utterly human stories that remind you where you belong. Looking back now, I see how much that night taught me. First, it taught me that words matter. What adults toss out as exaggeration, kids often clutch as truth. Sarcasm, hyperbole, casual threats, none of it translates in the literal mind of a child. Second, it taught me about obedience. How far I was willing to go just to avoid disappointing my mom. I'd trade oxygen for approval. That realization stayed with me into adulthood, shaping the way I saw authority, the way I balanced rules with reason. And third, it taught me something about love, because even though my mom messed up, grounding me from breathing of all things, her laughter and her honesty afterward softened it. She didn't double down. She didn't make me feel foolish. She laughed, admitted the absurdity, and turned it into something we could share forever. That's the thing about family. The worst moments often become the best stories. The mistakes, the embarrassments, the little disasters, they're the glue. Years later, when I told the story at a family gathering, my mom groaned and covered her face. "Oh no, not this one again," she said. But she was smiling. And I realized, even our worst parenting moments can become legends. Even our strictest rules can turn into laughter. That night wasn't about punishment, it was about learning, for both of us. Every family has its legends. Some families tell stories of great-grandparents crossing oceans, of heroic uncles who fought in wars, of cousins who became famous. My family, we tell the story of how I nearly suffocated myself because my mom said I was grounded from breathing. It has followed me through the years like a shadow, sometimes embarrassing, sometimes hilarious, but always strangely comforting. The first time I realized the story had outgrown me was at a holiday dinner when I was 16. A cousin I barely knew leaned over the table and whispered, "Hey, aren't you the kid who tried to stop breathing?" I wanted the ground to swallow me whole. But before I could answer, my brother jumped in, grinning like a game show host. "Oh, you've got to hear this one," he said. He turned purple, like a plum. The table roared with laughter. Even my dad, who had heard the story 100 times, chuckled into his drink. And there was my mom, shaking her head, pretending to be mortified but laughing all the same. That was the moment I understood. This story wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to all of us. It was part of the family archive, the catalog of tales that got dusted off whenever we needed to remember how ridiculous and human we all are. As I got older, the sting of embarrassment softened. In fact, I started to see the story differently. Because the truth is, it says a lot about me, about who I was as a kid, about the way I heard words like commandments carved into stone, about how desperately I wanted to follow the rules, even when they made no sense. It also says a lot about my mom, about her exhaustion that night, her dramatic humor, her slip of the tongue that accidentally turned into one of the most memorable punishments in family history. Most of all, it said something about the power of words. I've never forgotten how heavy they felt at 9 years old, how they pressed on me like a weight I couldn't shake, how they made me crouch behind couches, gasping for air, convinced that obedience meant survival. Now, as an adult, I hear that memory in the back of my mind whenever I'm about to say something thoughtless. Words matter. They land harder than we think, especially on kids. And yet, words can also heal. My mom's laughter, the way she owned her mistake, the way she turned it into a family joke instead of a scar, that mattered too. Even today, if I stop by my parents' house and sneak a cookie before dinner, my mom will look at me, raise an eyebrow and say, "Careful, or I'll ground you from breathing again." And I'll laugh, because now I know she doesn't mean it. Because now it's just shorthand for love. For the kind of love that survives mistakes, misunderstandings, and even absurd punishments. Sometimes when people ask me what my childhood was like, I tell them this story. I don't talk about grades, or sports, or summer vacations. I talk about Oreos and stealth, missions about turning purple behind the couch, about rolling across the lawn like a wannabe ninja. Because that night captures everything: the innocence of childhood, the chaos of family life, the way laughter saves us from our own seriousness. And whenever I tell it, I end the same way, by saying I learned 2 lessons that day. 1. Words matter. 2. I am very obedient when snacks are involved. In the end, the story isn't really about Oreos or breathing. It's about being 9 years old, caught between the literal and the absurd, between obedience and independence, between childhood and growing up. It's about a mom who said the wrong thing and a kid who believed her. It's about how families turn mistakes into memories, and memories into laughter. And if I had to do it all over again, well, I'd still smuggle the Oreos.